Single mom was arrested for stealing food. But truth changed everything. The security guard's hand clamped around Sarah's wrist as cans of beans and tuna tumbled from her coat onto the supermarket floor. Her 8-year-old daughter Emma watched in horror, tears streaming down her face as her mother was led away in handcuffs. But what happened next would shock an entire community and change countless lives forever. If this story already has you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will touch your heart. Sarah Matthews never imagined she'd end up in a police station at 34 years old, facing theft charges while her daughter sat alone in a cold waiting room. Just 6 months earlier, she had been a dedicated nurse with a stable job, a modest apartment, and enough to provide for Emma after her husband's death 3 years prior. Life wasn't easy as a widow, but they were managing, until everything fell apart with frightening speed. It began with persistent headaches that Sarah initially dismissed as stress. When her vision blurred during a hospital shift, causing her to administer the wrong medication to a patient, the consequences were swift. Though the patient recovered, Sarah was placed on unpaid leave pending investigation. The headaches worsened, forcing her to spend money she didn't have on medical tests that revealed a non-malignant brain tumor requiring immediate surgery. "I had to choose between paying rent and paying for the operation," Sarah later explained, her voice barely above a whisper. What kind of choice is that for a mother? She chose the surgery, draining her modest savings and maxing out her credit cards. The procedure was successful, but recovery took longer than expected. By the time she was well enough to work again, her position had been filled. The hospital offered sympathy but no job. The rent fell behind, then became impossible. Eviction followed with brutal efficiency. For 3 weeks, Sarah and Emma lived in their old Honda Civic, parked in different locations each night to avoid attention. Sarah applied for jobs daily, but the employment gap and her medical history made potential employers hesitant. Food stamps helped initially, but bureaucratic delays in renewing her benefits left them with nothing for nearly 2 weeks. "Mommy, I'm so hungry it hurts," Emma had whispered that morning, curled up in the back seat of their car turned home. The words broke something in Sarah. After dropping Emma at school with promises of dinner that night, she entered the supermarket with no money and desperate determination. Officer James Rodriguez was nearing the end of his shift when the call came in about a shoplifting arrest at Wilson's grocery. It was routine, until he saw the woman's face, hollow with hunger and shame, and the small backpack of belongings that suggested homelessness rather than criminal intent. "I'm not asking for myself," Sarah kept repeating. "My daughter hasn't eaten properly in days." Something about her story compelled Rodriguez to dig deeper. A few calls confirmed her medical history and recent eviction. Instead of processing her arrest, he made a decision that would alter the trajectory of many lives. "I'm not booking you," he told her, removing the handcuffs. "But you're coming with me." He drove Sarah to pick up Emma from school, then brought them to his sister Maria's restaurant, where they ate their first hot meal in weeks. As Emma devoured spaghetti, Rodriguez quietly made calls to social services and local charities. Maria Rodriguez watched the hungry child eat and felt a surge of purpose. "My restaurant has a small apartment upstairs that's been empty since my son moved out," she offered. "It's yours until you get back on your feet." No arguments. Sarah's story might have ended there, a private act of kindness in a world often short on compassion. But Officer Rodriguez, troubled by how easily a hard-working nurse could fall through society's cracks, shared her story, with permission, on the police department's social media page, asking for job leads. The post went viral overnight. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing Sarah about the impossible choices she'd faced. The hospital administrator who had let her go watched the interview with growing discomfort, recognizing the failure of their support systems for dedicated staff in crisis. Within days, job offers poured in. The hospital reached out with not just an apology but a new position with flexible hours during her continued recovery. A local nonprofit established a fund to help medical professionals facing similar circumstances. Community members donated furniture, clothes, and school supplies for Emma. But the most profound change came in how the community viewed poverty and crime. The local police department, inspired by Rodriguez's approach, implemented a new screening protocol for minor theft cases involving basic necessities, connecting people with resources rather than immediately pressing charges. Sarah eventually accepted a position at a community health clinic, where her experience made her uniquely qualified to help patients navigate both health and financial challenges. The apartment above Maria's restaurant became home for nearly a year until Sarah saved enough for a security deposit on a small house. On the one-year anniversary of her arrest, Sarah hosted a dinner for everyone who had helped them, Officer Rodriguez and his family, Maria, social workers, and neighbors who had become friends. Emma, now thriving in school again, had made a large thank you poster with photos of their journey. Sometimes the worst moment of your life can become the turning point toward something better, Sarah told the gathered group. I was arrested for stealing food, but what I found was a community. Officer Rodriguez, who had since been promoted partly due to his handling of Sarah's case, raised his glass. We're trained to enforce laws, but sometimes justice requires more than that. It requires seeing the human being behind the action. The local news covered this reunion too, but with a different focus, highlighting the community initiatives that had grown from Sarah's story. A food bank had expanded its emergency services. The hospital had implemented a staff emergency fund. The police department's compassionate intervention program was being studied by neighboring counties. Emma, now 9, had started a project at her school collecting snacks and supplies for classmates whose families were struggling. Nobody should feel so hungry they can't think, she explained with the simple wisdom of children. And nobody should feel so alone they can't ask for help. Sarah still kept the arrest report in a drawer, not as a reminder of shame, but as evidence of how quickly life can change, for worse and then for better. She had begun speaking at community events about poverty, healthcare gaps, and the thin line many families walk between stability and crisis. The truth that changed everything wasn't just my personal story, she would explain. It was the truth that any of us could be in that position, given the right combination of bad luck and systemic failures. And the other truth, that compassion, when organized and sustained, can rebuild what circumstance destroys. 3 years after her arrest, Sarah stood before the city council, now as the director of a new program connecting healthcare, social services, and emergency assistance for families in crisis. The program, named Bridge, had helped over 200 families avoid the spiral of poverty that had nearly claimed her own. When Officer Rodriguez chose to see me as a person in need rather than just a criminal, he built the first plank in this bridge, she told the council members. Each of you who contributed resources, changed policies, or simply showed kindness added to its strength. Now it's solid enough for others to cross. Emma, growing into a confident preteen, often accompanied her mother to these speaking engagements. She had no memory of hunger anymore, but she carried the lesson of that time in her developing sense of justice and community responsibility. The security guard who had arrested Sarah eventually became a volunteer at the Bridge program, helping identify people in the community who might need intervention before reaching crisis. I was just doing my job that day, he explained. But now I understand my job can include connecting people to help, not just enforcing rules. Maria's restaurant became a community hub, hosting monthly fundraising dinners for the program. Officer Rodriguez was promoted again, this time to develop training for police departments nationwide on compassionate intervention strategies for poverty-related offenses. The story continued to ripple outward. A state senator who heard Sarah speak championed legislation to strengthen safety nets for medical professionals facing health crises. A documentary filmmaker followed several families through the Bridge program, highlighting both their struggles and resilience. Sarah kept the small Honda Civic even after she could afford a better car, a reminder of those 3 weeks that had both broken and remade her. Sometimes, when life felt overwhelming, she would sit in it and remember sleeping there with Emma, the fear and uncertainty, and how completely their lives had transformed. The truth that changed everything, she wrote in a journal she kept for Emma to read someday, wasn't just that I was desperate rather than criminal. It was that communities have the power to solve problems that seem insurmountable to individuals. It was that systems can be changed when enough people care. It was that kindness, when organized and intentional, becomes justice. On the 5th anniversary of her arrest, Sarah published a book about her experience and the community response that followed. The proceeds established a scholarship fund for children whose parents had faced similar circumstances. Emma, now 13, wrote the foreword. "My mom didn't steal because she was bad," Emma wrote. "She stole because she loved me and didn't know what else to do. But what I learned is that there's always something else to do, if not alone, then together. That's the real truth that changed everything." The book became a bestseller, bringing national attention to the Bridge program and inspiring similar initiatives in cities across the country. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences on poverty, healthcare reform, and community policing. She always began with the same story, the moment cans fell from her coat onto the supermarket floor, and how that moment of profound shame became the foundation for profound change. "Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life," she would say. "Not because falling is good, but because there were hands waiting to help me back up." Those hands continued to multiply. The Bridge program expanded to 3 neighboring counties. The hospital where Sarah had once worked implemented comprehensive support services for staff facing medical or financial crises. The police department's compassionate intervention model became part of standard training at the state academy. 10 years after her arrest, Sarah stood in the grocery store where it had happened, now renovated and under new management. The store had become a partner in the Bridge program, donating food and offering jobs to program participants working toward stability. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come from that day," she told Emma, now a poised 18-year-old preparing for college with plans to study social work. "From stealing food to helping create systems where nobody needs to." Emma squeezed her mother's hand. "That's because you were brave enough to accept help and then brave enough to tell the truth. Most people only manage one or the other." The truth that had changed everything continued to work its transformation, in policies reformed, in systems reimagined, in lives rebuilt. Sarah's story became part of the community's identity, a reminder that compassion could be more than an individual virtue, it could be a foundation for justice. And somewhere in the city each night, Officer Rodriguez still patrolled, looking not just for those breaking laws but for those being broken by circumstance, carrying Sarah's story as a template for possibility, how the worst moment in someone's life could become, with the right intervention, the beginning of something better. If this story moved you, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the power we have to change lives when we choose compassion over judgment. Sometimes the truth really does change everything, including how we see and respond to each other in our most vulnerable moments.